So, hi everyone. For those who couldn't attend our morning panel, my name is Guilherme Fians, and I'm also one of the conveners of this panel. And I'm really grateful for all of those who could come and present and attend our panel and share these discussions with us. So today I'm presenting a paper called The Social Life of Esperanto Books, Circulating and Making an International Esperanto Community. Have you ever heard of a language called Esperanto? And is Esperanto still around? These questions come up quickly in any conversation about the language constructed in the late 19th century by the eye doctor Ludwig Lazar Zamenhof. And the answer is simple. Yes, this non-national language, very regular and simple to learn, is still alive and experiencing a revival, marked by many thousands of books originally written in Esperanto or translated from other languages into it, and also by the Esperanto version of Wikipedia, which has more articles than the Hindi or Hebrew versions of this online encyclopedia. As I wanted to learn more about those who choose to speak this language, I asked myself, okay, so where can I find Esperanto speakers? I easily came across Esperanto courses, Esperanto literature, Esperanto music, as well as online forums and groups where people exchanged text messages in the language. However, Esperanto is no one's first language, and is not officially or regularly spoken by any bounded group of people anywhere, which contrasts directly with most definitions of speech community. Gumpers, who consolidated this concept in social linguistics, argues that speech community is a social group which may be either monolingual or multilingual, held together by frequency of social interaction and set off from the surrounding areas by weaknesses in the lines of communication. If a speech community is defined by people regularly using a language, and if this depends on interpersonal relations, how can there be an Esperanto-speaking community? And if these language users are potentially everywhere but concentrated anywhere, where can such a community exist concretely? Aiming to contribute to discussions on community building, mobility, and technology, I conducted my research around this apparent paradox of a speech community where people don't often speak the language for not being regularly gathered nor in continuous contact with each other. And to understand this, I decided to map out this transnational speech community, starting from the headquarters of the Universal Esperanto Association in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. This is one of the few places where Esperanto is spoken on a daily basis as the association's working language. When I started doing my long-term ethnographic fieldwork in this association, I was told that the condition for me to do research there was that I should also work as a volunteer during my stay. This association is responsible for organizing the Universal Congresses of Esperanto, which are the largest international Esperanto meetings, gathering around 3,000 participants every year. When I arrived in Rotterdam, we were 3 months away from this Congress in that year, in 2017. And the association's president asked me to assist Andre, which is a pseudonym, and he refers to the office worker responsible for the bookshop at the association. Andre, a 61-year-old professional Esperanto speaker who works at Esperanto Association since 1989, explained our first task to me. We should fill in around 70 boxes with books, separating them by category and size, to be dispatched to a temporary bookshop in South Korea, where the next Esperanto Congress would be held. Bringing a pack of worn-out cardboard boxes, he wiped the sweat off his forehead, pointed at the boxes and said, and here I quote him, "We're going to reuse these old boxes. They are the same ones we used to transport materials for the Congress in Slovakia last year, and most of these boxes had been used many times before for many other congresses. Some of them have already been to 2 or 3 continents, 5 or 6 countries, and have traveled more than many people in this office." End of quote. In looking at how books in Esperanto written by authors from all over the world, translated from and into several languages, were packed into boxes that have traveled more than many people, as he said, my core methodological approach was to follow the circulation of books, boxes, and other things to understand how technologies and mobility animate the speech community. Andre knew the location of everything by heart. As he showed me the list of books to be packed and taught me how to navigate those busy rooms, he explained why we were packing only books. And here I quote, "Usually we send a lot of CDs and DVDs as well, but not this year. When the Congress is in Europe, it's easier and cheaper to transport all these things. But because this one will be in South Korea, the courier who will ship all this told us that we can send books and pay only the transportation costs. But if we send CDs and DVDs, we have to pay special taxes for this material to enter the country. And that would be too expensive. It means we would have to raise the price of these products when selling them at the Congress, and it wouldn't be worth it. So we are sending only books this time." End of quote. Aside from choosing the materials to be dispatched, another concern of Andre was to price the books. We were putting the price tags in each of them in euros, hoping that most people would pay for them by card or by transferring the money to the association's online payment system. But he would also have to juggle payments in won, the currency in South Korean. Also, he was expecting the sales to be lower this year, because apart from the Korean participants, everybody else attending this Congress would have to take an airplane to reach Seoul because of the location of the island. And fewer people would consider buying books, knowing that this would mean having to pay for the extra weight on the plane. When Andre is not packing books or attending universal congresses, he sits behind his desk at the bookshop. Even though few people walk in and buy books in person, he receives every day several orders by email, WhatsApp, and Telegram messages through the association's online payment system, and sometimes even by phone or post. In this way, performing his job as a bookseller also involves knowing where speakers are, which technologies they use to communicate, what brings them to learning and speaking Esperanto, what language-related commodities they consume, and how often they would normally place orders. But books are not the only things that circulate through Esperanto. In the early years of the language, letter exchanges were among the first materializations of this speech community. The postcards and stamps produced with Esperanto-related motifs in the first half of the 20th century depict what Esperanto is all about. As this postcard here shows, Esperanto is meant to be all about bringing people together, even though not necessarily physically together, sharing ideas and in many different ways communicating in the language. Over time, other forms of circulation and mobility emerged. So in 1905, the first Universal Congress of Esperanto was held in France, and since then, such congresses have been taking place every year, always in a different country, being interrupted only by the world wars, when these congresses were cancelled for some years, and by the coronavirus pandemic, when the Universal Congress went online. Andre, like other office workers I met in Rotterdam, showed me that working at the Universal Esperanto Association meant performing on a daily basis a vast set of practices of mobility, which includes to transfer, to pack, to send, to post, to mail, to dispatch, to receive, to travel, to attend, among many others. These practices of mobility also relate closely to one question that people who do not speak Esperanto often ask. If this language is oriented towards international communication, where do people speak it? In other words, where should this ethnographer here, me, go to live with his interlocutors if these are scattered everywhere but grouped nowhere? Reading Esperanto literature, for example, the books Andre and I were packing, provides a way for people to use the language. However, it only allows for the use of receptive reading skills. Since using a language in all its glory requires mobilizing both receptive and productive skills, any fully fledged engagement with verbal communication becomes a collective endeavor. Aside from exchanging letters, postcards, and online messages, as well as attending Esperanto meetings in local associations, another option is to travel to international Esperanto congresses, like the one in South Korea. However, these gatherings are short-lived and the contact they enable with this speech community doesn't last for longer than 1 week. When Moshe Shokate was studying Israeli immigrant in New York, he suggested the expression one-night stand ethnicity to refer to occasions in which these people gathered in private or public venues to sing along to popular Israeli songs. Since these migrants did not seem to establish a close-knit group, these were the only occasions in which their national belonging was made evident through their use of the Hebrew language and their singing. Reaching back to Esperanto, bringing this speech community into being includes preparing classes, organizing meetings, as well as booking conference venues and tables at restaurants, and also, of course, advertising these occasions in Esperanto pages and channels on social media. Materializing this community, then, requires the constant and regular creation of contexts in which people can speak the language. Following Shokate, we could argue that the intermittent and short-lived character of the materializations of the Esperanto community characterizes it as a one-night stand speech community. This community relies not only on the labor involved in organizing events and making people and things circulate, but also on the technologies that facilitate or hinder these instances of mobility. Esperanto speakers may not be geographically concentrated, but the technologies that enable them to connect and to be connected are to a large extent traceable. As indicated by the books and cardboard boxes traveling from the Netherlands to South Korea, being an Esperanto speaker in practice means meeting fellow speakers regularly, attending congresses, making friends, exchanging contact details, communicating in Esperanto through social media and mobile phone apps, as well as sending Esperanto books abroad and organizing temporary bookshops on the other side of the world. In many ways, this community is established and evolves through a network-like organization, in which the language itself is often the major technology that prompts Esperanto associations, congresses, magazines, apps, and social media to play their roles. In this sense, mapping out the use of these technologies seems to offer a way of stabilizing some of these connections and of making sense of this speech community. When I helped Andre in Rotterdam, we were turning the Esperanto Association into a hub from which many kinds of movement began to gain relevance for Esperanto speakers, as books, leaflets, magazines, CDs, DVDs, people, ideas, knowledge, and information, among other things, were being set in motion. While I tried to make sense of this circulation, Andre and I were not only mapping out connections, we were ourselves connecting actors by making things circulate. And in this way, my methodological endeavor of tracing the use of Esperanto turned out to mean playing a central role in the continuous building of this transnational speech community. However, as Ghassan Haj warns us when talking about the limits of multi-sided ethnographies, issues such as physical exhaustion and restrictions in time and financial resources play a role in the process of interrupting movements and cutting networks, not only for ethnographers, but also for Esperanto speakers. And Andre is fully aware of it. During our preparation of the cardboard boxes, he stated that some people don't attend these international congresses because of their difficulties in dealing with foreign food habits, because of the long time spent traveling and waiting in airports, as well as because of problems to obtain visas, as is the case of many young Africans who are refused visas to attend Esperanto meetings in Europe. Something similar happens to CDs and DVDs that are prevented from traveling because of the high taxes imposed on their circulation. In this sense, some of the actors and connections that enable movement also set its pace and offer resistance to it, both facilitating and preventing mobility. Travel documents and means of transportation may make traveling possible, but not always and not for everyone, as lack of visas, lack of money, long waits in airports, and high taxes restrain flows. Since Esperanto is meant to be used for international communication, speaking it among people from the same linguistic background doesn't allow for this language's use to be considered authentic. For this reason, joining the Esperanto speech community involves recurrent but episodic practices of encountering fellow speakers and communicating through text or voice in this language. International Esperanto congresses, message exchange, and literature reading constitute this community as a one-night stand one, as an outcome of the spatially and temporally fragile character of these connections. This community is also marked by its pop-up constitution, as face-to-face and online meetings or book purchases take place a limited number of times per year, covering ever-changing locations. With the Universal Congress and other annual meetings and festivals, this community gains a temporary territory, and once these meetings are over, they leave traces in maps, expanding the list of territories this community has once occupied. To conclude, circulating, moving, traveling through Esperanto, organizing and attending enactments of this pop-up community, writing, recording, or translating books and other kinds of media, building connections with fellow speakers from different national linguistic backgrounds, as well as making Esperanto books, magazines, and letters circulate, illustrate the amount of labor required to materialize this transnational speech community. And here in this photo, finally, you can see Andrei's bookshop in action in South Korea. So even when Esperanto speakers are not circulating, their ideas, letters, online messages, and cardboard boxes are circulating. Therefore, in trying to map out this community through making sense of the circulation of people, things, and ideas, the technologies that mediate those practices end up producing this community. If technology refers to certain manners or processes deployed to enable or accomplish specific tasks, it becomes clear that some of the technologies I mentioned during this talk are meant to slow down or hinder movements, while others aim at expanding, accelerating, and promoting circulation. From the analysis of the material I have presented, it's easy to conclude that the combination of many kinds of technology, from social media and shipping companies to the international language itself, is what breathes life again and again into this speech community. However, going back to our initial question on the feasibility of such a speech community, the answer is this transnational speech community exists and persists for over 130 years, precisely because people cannot regularly speak this language. Being able to set their belonging to the Esperanto speech community apart from their routines at least once a year when they attend the Universal Congress is what makes this language attractive to so many people worldwide, as it enables them to do something different with different people through a different language. Thanks to the technologies that enable Esperanto speakers to be mobile, and also thanks to the technologies that prevent them from being mobile all the time, they can make cosmopolitan friendships that, just as with couchsurfing, as Paula Bialski argues in her book, are likely to be brief, but that are, for the very same reason, intense and exciting, like a communitarian form of one-night stand. Thank you for your attention.